In 1807, the importation of slaves into British territories was prohibited, and the Royal Navy took on the task of patrolling the African coast to intercept slave ships heading to nations that still allowed the practice, regardless of their nationality. This had a huge impact on the American slave trade as well, leading to a reduction in the number of enslaved individuals being brought into the United States to work in various capacities, particularly in the southern part of the country. By this time, many slave traders in America had already recognized the changing tide as there was a growing and influential abolition movement in the US. In 1808, the movement successfully advocated for a ban on the importation of slaves. It's important to note that neither British nor the US abolished slavery entirely at this point. Rather, they ceased the forced abduction of Africans for the purpose of enslavement. The institution of slavery in Great Britain peacefully came to an end in 1833 through legislative measures. However, in the United States, the abolition of slavery required a civil war, as it was deeply entrenched in the social and economic fabric of the nation. Slavery was commonly referred to as the peculiar institution, particularly in the South. After the transatlantic slave trade was banned, Southern slave owners resorted to two methods to acquire more slaves: engaging in illegal slave trading, which persisted until the Civil War, and promoting forced reproduction and among enslaved individuals. In this episode of History on Fleek, we shed a light on a lesser-known aspect of American slavery, the breeding of slaves. Before the Civil War, the black population in the United States grew significantly despite the ban on slave importation. In 1810, there were approximately 1.3 million black individuals, with the majority being enslaved. By 1830, the number of slaves had increased to 2.32 million, along with over 319,500 free black individuals. In 1861, just before the Civil War, there were 4.4 million slaves and nearly 500,000 free black individuals, showing a substantial growth in the black population. The increase in the enslaved population came primarily through natural reproduction, rather than the importation of slaves from Africa, as the ban was in effect. In addition to the many atrocities of slavery, such as violence and deplorable living conditions, enslaved women were subjected to the horrifying reality of sexual slavery. They had no choice and were forced into sexual relationships to increase the enslaved population and satisfy the sexual desires of their owners. Enslaved men were also victims of sexual violence, albeit in different and sometimes less overt ways. In the 1990s, a heated debate emerged in the United States regarding Thomas Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman at his Monticello estate in Virginia. This controversy centered around the nature of their relationship, including the possibility of a sexual relationship between them. The topic remains a subject of discussion and debate among historians, often generating polarizing views, particularly in academic and sociological circles. Sally Hemings' ancestry was indeed complex. Her mother, Betty Hemings, had African ancestry, while her father, John Hemings, was a white English captain. John Hemings was also the father of Martha Jefferson, who later became Thomas Jefferson's wife. After Martha's death, Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings began. This familial connection between Jefferson and Hemings adds a layer of complexity to their relationship, as she was both his sister-in-law and his mistress. The racial dynamics and power imbalance between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings are significant. While no direct accusations of the force have been made, given the age difference and power dynamics, it's clear that Sally, at the age of 14, was in a vulnerable position and may not have had the ability to freely consent to a relationship with Jefferson. As a powerful and respected figure, Jefferson held significant influence over Sally's circumstances while they were in Paris, where he served as a minister of the United States. Sally Hemings did experience a relatively freer life while in France, where slavery had not yet been abolished. However, when she returned to the United States with Thomas Jefferson, it's unclear if the promise he made to grant freedom to their children was fully realized. 2 of their children died at a young age, and there's no definitive record of the other 4 being formally freed. Nevertheless, historical accounts suggest that the 2 of their children, Harriet and Beverly, later assimilated into white society before the American Civil War. The exact details and outcomes of their freedom remain a topic of historical discussion and investigation. In 2017, archaeologists made a significant discovery at Monticello, the estate of Thomas Jefferson. They uncovered a room that had previously been identified as a bathroom, but was later revealed to be the bedroom of Sally Hemings. This room had been intentionally covered and later excavated in the 1940s before being concealed again. The proximity of the room to Jefferson's own bedroom, along with DNA evidence from Hemings' known descendants and Jefferson's descendants, provided confirmation of a relationship between Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. The discovery shed light on the hidden aspects of their connection, known only to those who worked at Monticello and Jefferson's close associates. Sally Hemings's relatively privileged life does not diminish the experiences of other enslaved women during that time or later. Many historians believe that evidence from various sources, including books, legal testimonies, biographies, letters, and documents from the post-slave trade and pre-Civil War era, indicates the existence of breeding farms in the South. These farms were places where black women were treated as domesticated animals and forcibly bred to increase the number of enslaved individuals. While the complete proof of these breeding farms is not universally accepted, the available historical records strongly suggest their existence. It is indeed a well-documented fact that women in the slave-owning South were subjected to forced reproduction or were coerced and encouraged to have children. The terminology used to refer to these women, such as breeding stock, drew parallels to the treatment of livestock. This dehumanizing language highlights the objectification and exploitation of enslaved women's reproductive capabilities, whether it occurred on specific breeding farms or within the broader plantation system. Forced reproduction through sexual assault and coercion was pervasive and deeply entrenched in the institution of slavery. Slave owners did maintain records of enslaved women's pregnancies and the paternity of their children, similar to how farmers track breeding in their livestock. These records were primarily intended to manage the slave population, prevent inbreeding, and maximize profits. The emphasis was on maintaining a productive workforce rather than showing concern for the well-being of the women. To ensure pregnancy, enslaved women were often subjected to sexual assaults and coerced sexual encounters. These acts range from overtly violent assaults to more subtle forms of coercion. It's important to acknowledge that any non-consensual sexual contact is an assault, regardless of the level of physical violence involved. The experiences of enslaved women varied, but the underlying power dynamics and the lack of agency in these relationships underscore the systemic and widespread abuse suffered by enslaved women. Enslaved women's sexual encounters were often observed by their owners or overseers, with some individuals deriving twisted pleasure from these situations. The exploitation and lack of privacy were undoubtedly traumatizing for the women involved. When it came to the men, those who were physically strong and well-endowed were typically chosen as breeding stock to impregnate enslaved women. While some men may have been granted the illusion of choice or occasional rewards, they were often ordered to engage in sexual acts repeatedly until a woman or sexually mature girl became pregnant. Failure to comply or perform could result in punishment or increased workload, adding further coercion to these encounters. The legal principle of partus sequitur ventrum was prevalent in the pre-Civil War United States. It dictated that a child's status followed that of the mother, meaning that a child born to a white man and a black woman was considered black and enslaved. Although exceptions existed, many white slave owners and overseers fathered children with enslaved women, contributing to the complex dynamics of power and exploitation. It's important to recognize the deeply disturbing nature of these practices, which involved the dehumanization, abuse, and manipulation of enslaved individuals. Caroline Randall Williams, in her thought-provoking op-ed titled "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument," published in the New York Times in 2020, eloquently expressed the profound impact of slavery on her identity. She described her rape-colored skin and her light brown blackness as a living testament to the enduring legacy of the Old South. In her powerful, poetic words, she said that her body is a monument, embodying the painful history and ongoing struggles faced by the black community in America. Williams' statement reminds of the deep-rooted injustice and dehumanization inflicted upon enslaved black women. They were just seen as an object and sexually exploited by Southern white males, as their owners regarded these encounters as insignificant or devoid of meaning. Williams' powerful metaphorical representation highlights the lasting impact of slavery and challenges society to confront the painful truths embedded within the history of the Confederacy. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much if you made it this far. If you like my content, don't forget to subscribe and share this video, and we'll see you in the next one.